What's good, everybody? It's your boy, the Real AG, and I'm back at you again on the Lockdown Defense Sports Network. Now, up to this point, you have seen myself and the Hit Squad, reviewing what these teams have been doing in the offseason, previewing how things are looking for training camp and, the eventual regular season. Now it's time to kind of look at that final burning question or that headline that will need to be answered at the end of the season for each and every team. So let's just get right into it, ladies and gentlemen, looking at the AFC East and, what are the biggest storylines or headlines or burning question, heading into 2025. So looking at the front runner in the division, obviously starting with the Buffalo Bills, what is the biggest question that they need to answer? And I think it's quite undoubtedly, will the Bills finally get over that playoff hump and get their Super Bowl? Like I said, they are the perennial division winner. They have won the AFC East the last 5 years. Josh Allen is the reigning MVP, and they are coming off of a 3-point defeat against my Chiefs from making it to the Super Bowl. So, they are undoubtedly, unquestionably always going to be among the elite teams in the NFL in this Allen regime. It's just a matter of if they can ever get to that, final place in the season and hoist the Lombardi. So, looking at the Bills, like I said, undoubtedly winning their division, making the playoffs. They have just lost 4 of their last 5 playoff, games to the Kansas City Chiefs by a total of 26 points. And other than that, they've lost to the other, AFC headliners, if you will. So, like I said, it's the only issue now is if they will ever overcome that hump. And I think the biggest factors to that is, like I said, can they get past the other AFC powerhouses like the Chiefs, like the Ravens, like the Bengals when healthy? And is the offseason moves they made to revamp their defense specifically, or more specifically, their D-line enough to, be effective when it matters most? Kind of looking at what they did, obviously added Joey Bosa, Michael Hoyt, Larry Ojanobi. Both Hoyt and Ojanobi are actually suspended for 6 games, but added a lot in free agency, added further in the D-line through the draft with Landon Jackson, the edge rusher, TJ Sanders, and Deion Walker, the D tackles. So, looking at what they did, they took the, let's have a lot of depth approach and kind of took the, let's stay the course and hope for the best in terms of having who they have on offense and just seeing if their defense can be enough. I don't think it's ultimately going to be enough to get them over the hump, and I'm not trying to be a hater on the Bills, but it seems to be the moves they made or a lot of the similar moves they have made in this Allen regime. Look at Joey Bosa signing, very similar to the Von Miller signing. That didn't get them over the hump. They take these kind of gadget, tangible trait type players for their D line that doesn't seem to get them over that edge. So, you look at this is a defensive unit that has given up 32.2 points in their last playoff losses. And like I said, I just think it's a lot of the same story, different year with who they brought in and what they're hoping they can accomplish. So, that kind of answers that is the burning question and kind of lays out, what I think will happen for the Bills in 2025. So moving on to the next team in the division, those Jets, and what is the biggest question they need to answer this season? And I think that is, can Justin Fields be the guy, or can they unlock the potential, if there is any, of Justin Fields and have him be, their answer long term? They already have, had a medical scare with him, but he thankfully has only missed 1 practice. But I think this is a player that has serious questions about his ability, taking the injury concerns out of it. Ultimately look at, he was first-round pick with the Bears and lost his job after 3 seasons. Pittsburgh gave up on him after 6 games, and even the Jets didn't make an overly huge investment in him in the free agency period. So, what goes into, can he be those guys? It's ultimately, can he make this passing attack for the Jets respectable enough to threaten defenses? And can he be consistent in the passing attack to be the long-term solution. Like I kind of said, I mean, he undoubtedly can make plays with his legs. That's what he's known for. You see the graphic here, making plays with his legs. But the question with him has always just been the consistency in, consistency as a passer, consistency in short intermediary throws, and just being able to elevate the offense. Now, I think some reasons to be hopeful that that question could be answered positively is, first and foremost, they did reunite him with his college wide receiver and Garrett Wilson. The new offensive coordinator they brought in came with Aaron Glenn from Detroit, so he's from that Ben Johnson coaching tree. So I think we could undoubtedly see some pretty unique creativity with using Fields and his legs and just opening up the offense. But ultimately, I don't think that it is enough to, I don't think he's going to do enough, Justin Fields, to be labeled as the guy or the long-term solution for the Jets. Like I said, there's serious questions about his ability to read a defense and react within the pocket. And, again, just being consistent and accurate in short and intermediary throws, which is what thrusts a passing offense forward in this league. So you look at those questions with Fields alone, on top of, the questions surrounding his supporting cast, because outside of Garrett Wilson, you're looking at receivers like Josh Reynolds, Tyler Johnson, Arian Smith, Alan Lazard, Malachi Corley, and Xavier Gibson. I know outside of Jets Nation, you're probably thinking, who the hell are those guys? Exactly. And he's hasn't shown improvement through the multiple chances that he's gotten. Like he got 3 years in Chicago, albeit definitely a dumpster fire with staff and things like that. But if a guy's got those talents and the ability to take those step forward, at the QB position, I think we would have seen it at this point with Fields, through the teams he's been with. So, that kind of wraps it up for the Jets. Moving on, we got the Dolphins down in the 305, and what is the biggest question that they need to answer for 2025? And I think ultimately that is, can Tyreek and Tua, get back on the same page? And, look at kind of collectively, Miami's offense is definitely rides with the success of Tyreek. He had a down year in 2024, and we saw that kind of hamper the offense, as well as, Tua throwing to a healthy Tyreek is what got Tua paid. So Miami won, just based on the investment they made into Tua, need that to get answered positively, and they need things to get back on the right track so they can continue to ascend in the playoff hierarchy like they were until 2024. But, looking at just kind of the history or the tension between the two, I see why it's definitely a burning question. Obviously, like I said, 2024 was definitely a down year for Miami. We saw Tyreek be frustrated with not making the playoffs, made comments, social media, interviews, whatever, saying or indicating, he wanted to be traded from the team. Obviously, Tua heard that. His teammates heard that. Tua decided to address it publicly with the media, and, push back and talk about breaking the trust and having to build all that back. And that's, not something you want to hear from your number one receiver and QB in terms of the way they're describing their relationship to the media. So that definitely needs to be built back up, and you got to hope that they are doing that this offseason heading into 2025, because it's crucial to the success of Miami. You look at the 40 games that Tua and Tyreek have played together. Tyreek's had 269 catches, 3,901 yards, and 27 touchdowns, with Tua. So that is, what drives this offense forward, and what got Tua paid. And ultimately, I think those questions are what goes into, can they get things back on track? Is this McDaniel experiment over in Miami? And, is Tua truly the franchise guy? And I think that the answers to those questions, like I said, all hinge back on Miami returning to that explosive prowess in their passing attack through Tyreek, and Tua staying healthy and being able to be more accurate in the deep passing game. But, I don't anticipate those questions being answered. Like I said, Tua just at this point has not shown signs of improvement in terms of deep passing attack, deep passing accuracy. He is a timing-based QB. I think opposing defenses have figured that out when it matters most. Same vein with McDaniel. I think the McDaniel, gimmicks, I think teams have caught on to, and all the motions and misdirections he uses, I don't think are as effective as they used to be. And also looking at Tyreek, love him, former Chiefs fan, but you can't deny. And I think some components that made Tyreek special, are certainly in decline. So you couple all of that together, and it's really hard to think that Tua and Tyreek are going to get back on the same page or return to 2023 form, which saw them have 1,700 yards, and them making the playoffs and playing in Kansas City. And I don't think that. I think we see some serious restructuring of Miami and a new coach and potentially a new quarterback, after 2025. But that pretty much wraps up Miami. And to round things out on the AFC East headlines, we finish it up with them Pats up in Boston, or New England. I should be correct geographically there. But I think the burning question, our biggest headline coming into the season is, is quarterback Drake May who or what they think he is? And I think last season, in what was a pretty disappointing one with a essentially stopgap head coach, you did see enough out of May to believe he has the tools to be a franchise QB or the QB of the future. He threw for almost 2,300 yards and had 17 total touchdowns, but he did turn the ball over 16 times. And, Hunter Henry was his number one target. So those aren't the best of things you want for your rookie QB, but you look at what they did this offseason and who they brought in, obviously Mike Vrabel and who he brought in as support staff. I think the wheels are in motion and things are tracking in the right direction for this question to be answered in a positive light. And I think some components into that are, what can help answer that question is, can this extreme makeover that they did of, spending the most money in free agency and drafting important stalwart players early in the draft, is that enough to create this into a playoff team and enough to build a reliable supporting cast around their QB? So, this year, ultimately, we're going to learn how effective the Pats can be at adding pieces around, their hopeful rookie QB to progress him and grow him further. First and foremost, I think one addition to that that's not being talked about enough is that they did bring in Josh McDaniels to be the OC. You can say what you want about him as head coach, but he is undoubtedly effective and ultra effective as the offensive coordinator in New England, and always just seems to find his way back and always produces. They drafted Will Campbell as the franchise left tackle, and so far at week one in the preseason, that looks to be as advertised. They added Stephon Diggs. They added Mac Hollins, and like I said, spent the most money in free agency to revamp the defense and rebuild the defense. And you look at bringing in Vrabel, who's a strong defensive head coach and certainly has the reputation to build a positive culture. Like, he turned the Titans into a pretty winning team. So you got to think that, first and foremost, the defense will be drastically improved. So you couple all those things with the flashes you saw from Drake May as a rookie, with what you think will be better protection from the offensive line, better receivers. I think that May will show he is the guy. They will continue to build around him. And I think the Pats as a team ascend, in totality. Really, in this division, the Bills are the only team that doesn't have a major unanswered question. They're the team that's won it 5 years in a row. They're the only threat, unless one of Miami or the Jets figure it out. So I could see the Pats, being that sneaky playoff team, are just right on the cusp of taking that step forward in 2026. But there you have it. So quick little recap. I think the Pats and the Bills, I think just the Pats answer their question. We'll see what happens with the Bills in the playoffs, and the Jets and the Dolphins are continued through an internal damnation of doomness based on their decisions. But that wraps up our biggest headlines for the AFC East, ladies and gentlemen. As always, please be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment your thoughts down below. I want to hear from you, Bills, Dolphins, Jets, and Pats fans are just NFL fans, let us hear from you. If you want to get at me or any of the other Hit Squad members, there's our social information. Boom. And if you want to find more Lockdown Defense content, there you have it. We are anywhere and everywhere across social media. So that wraps up the video. As always, I'm the real AG. This is the Lockdown Defense Sports Network, and we'll catch y'all on the flip side.